Okay. Shavua Tov, Boker Tov, Chodesh Tov, and Kites Tov. It's wonderful to see you back here and also to see our friends on Zoom. We have here Aaron Bardugo, we have Adam Goodvach, and Kravitz was here for a minute. I guess it should be back in also. So it's a pleasure. And meaning it was not too difficult this time to count the votes. So it seems most of us were interested in continuing this, I don't know, strange or unique, it depends how you see it, blend of history and Torah. So we would continue our series about the great Torah giants of our generation, meaning early generations. And Bezat Hashem, as people have asked for, I hope that slowly but surely we'll make our way also to the 20th and even the 21st century, but it would take some time. I will try, Bezrat Hashem and Bli Neder, to improve on giving one shiur per person. So that's what we will try to do. There is some difficulty here because as you can understand, as we are coming close to our own time, we have more data. That is just the way things are because there is more that can be preserved when it's a smaller gap of time. When we speak about Rashi, almost 1,000 years ago, so what has survived is relatively small regarding his personal life. And even Torah, I mean, from Rashi, we have many things that were preserved. But when we are coming close to our time, then you have much more information on the historical side, much more information on the Torah side. So I would have to pick and choose. And Bezat Hashem, I hope that we'd be able, to achieve our goals. So again, I think I said it also when we began our learning on this topic, I'm not an historian. It's very important for me to emphasize that. So everything that I said from the point of view of history is things that I take from other books that I read. I try not to be from Wikipedia, but more reliable sources. But beyond that, it's what I read. And what I try to do as best as I can is not only to speak about the history in which I'm not an expert on anything, but I'm less of an expert, but I'm something more knowledgeable in the impact that these personalities had on the way that we now are learning Torah, the way we now perceive Yahadut, Halacha, Torah, Machshava. So that's what I am trying to emphasize on. Okay, so after this small introduction, we begin or continue. And we are moving from the Rishonim, the early commentators, the early halachic decisors, that is the age roughly between, let's say, 10th century to 15th century, the end of the 15th century. So that is roughly the time of the Rishonim. We finished our learning of the Rishonim speaking about the Shulchan Aruch and the comments of the Rema on the Shulchan Aruch. And by having the Shulchan Aruch and the comments of the Rema, we are basically packing up the conclusions of the work of the Rishonim, and we open a new period, a new era. Now, it is important to understand that although I believe that the processes I am describing now within the Torah world are mostly internal, meaning they follow the dynamic of the way Torah is being learned and Torah is being taught. However, obviously Jews did not live in a vacuum. They lived in an external culture that was also going through its own processes. And it would be, I think, unwise for us to assume that there was no interaction and no sometimes similarities or even influence from one world onto the other. And if I don't know each one here and the time from where he last learned in high school about the history of Europe. But if you try to maybe remember what important thing is happening in Europe in the 16th century, it began in the end of the 15th century, but we can say that it enters into high gear and it expands to all of Europe in the 16th century. So I would save you from the embarrassment. It's called the Renaissance. Yes, it's called the Renaissance. So again, I'm not an historian, and it would be, I'm not going to try and describe what the Renaissance is, and also you can just type in on Wikipedia and be more knowledgeable than what I am. So what we can say is that the Renaissance in the non-Jewish world is sometimes, it's a revival, that's just a translation of the word, and what it means is that people say, wait a minute, in the last 500 years, we were in the time of darkness. That means we did not apply our own thinking. We were only following external authorities, mainly church authorities, but not only. And the Renaissance in its beginning means to return to Greek thought, which precedes Christianity. And that's a period of a few decades, even maybe half a century, in which suddenly Aristotle and Plato and other Greek philosophers are being brought again to prominence in European thought, which did not happen mostly for the last 500 years. Most of the books were not even, even if they were translated into Latin, they were not in the cycle. And now suddenly the books are being translated, they are being read, they are being printed, because now there is print. Now, so in the beginning, it's Aristotle and Plato, but when people begin to doubt authority, then it would not end only with doubting the authority of the church or the scientific world of the last 500 years. Because if you begin to work with your own thoughts, then very fast you would also begin to doubt the Greek philosophers themselves. And that is, we may say, the second phase of the Renaissance. And that is when, if I do some name dropping just for, so Copernicus, or we speak about maybe more known and also would be part of our story, would be Johannes Kepler. And we can speak about Francis Bacon. And we can speak about Martin Luther King. I'm not speaking about Martin Luther King of the 20th century, right? So we speak about the original Martin Luther King. So all of these people in different spheres, in astronomy, Luther King, thank you. So all of these people in different spheres of, some of them of philosophy, of science, of astronomy, of religion, they rethink. They say we should go back to the fundamentals and reassess our understanding of them. Now we are still 50 or 70 years before Descartes, but he's already in the making, right? And we remember what would be his chidush, his novelty. He would say, you cannot trust anything that you did not understand with your own mind, right? I doubt everything that I cannot prove. Now that is something which would be unthinkable for a medieval thinker, because for him, Masoret, tradition, what had come from generations, that is not less reliable source, maybe even more reliable source than what you can figure out with your own mind, because what came out from tradition is the summary of many minds. What you can think about is only you yourself. And that was the mindset for many centuries. And suddenly there is this great shift. Now, as I said, on one hand, we should be very careful from immediately equating what is happening in the non-Jewish world to what is happening in the Jewish world, especially in Ashkenaz, because as we said many, many times, the Ashkenazic Jewish culture is extremely insular. As far as we know, most of the Baalei HaTosfot, these are the Rabbanim that we spoke about at length during the winter. So they were active during as I said, the period of the Rishonim, it seems that they could not read Latin. So the influence from outside was weak, not non-existent, but weak. That is not the case when we speak about the Maharal. The Maharal is well acquainted with the development of science in the non-Jewish world. As an interesting side point, he has a student, which we would speak about that, Bezat Hashem, Rabbi David Gans. Now, this Rabbi David Gans, the Maharal sends in Prague. So there was an astronomer that seems that he was very important. I'm not a big, I do not have big knowledge in astronomy, in the history of astronomy, and not in astronomy at all. But it seems there was some very important guy named Tycho Brahe, who was a Danish astronomer, and he found himself for certain reasons in Prague. And Johannes Kepler was his aide. But in the way, you know, how things work, this Tycho Brahe died young, and Kepler was the one to complete his work. So the laws were called the laws of the movement of the stars. So they were called after the aide. Although in a sense, that's, you know, it is what it is. So this guy, Tycho Brahe, had a big, I would guess, we would say today, observatory, star observatory, in Prague. And the Maharal sent his student, Rabbi David Gans, to work in the observatory. And he was a friend of this Johannes Kepler. And he actually wrote a book. David Gans wrote a book about it named Nechmad Venaim. And in the introduction to the book, David Gans writes, the reason why I write the book is because my Rabbi, the Maharal, sent me because he thought it would be, he told me, go to this observatory because they developed there a new science and bring me back the knowledge that is being learned. So we see that the Maharal was very much into understanding the new science. Again, as a side point, we will not speak about Rabbi David Gans here, but he also wrote what is considered to be the first historical work in the Jewish world from the time of Josephus. So Josephus is the 1st century, and now we speak about the 60th century. So for 1500 years, no one, so that is an exaggeration, but that is usually how you depict it, so that for 1500 years, almost no one was writing historical accounts in the Jewish people. And the Maharal is asking this Rabbi David Gans to write not only an astronomical tractate, but also an historical account of the Jewish nation. And also, by the way, he also wrote an international history. And he has in his introduction an explanation why he thinks that it is also important for us as Jews not only to learn Jewish history, but also to learn about the history of the world in general. So all of that is, I think, I find very, very, very interesting. And you can see from here that the Maharal is trying to be as connected as he can. As I said, not only his hand in Torah was huge, but he was also trying to understand the shifts, the change that was occurring in the world during his lifetime. He was considered by the non-Jews also as someone who is knowledgeable beyond only Torah, and he was granted an interview with the Rudolf. Rudolf was, I think we spoke about him already. So he was the Caesar of what we'd call today Germany. There was no Germany. I think I spoke that many times. So there was no Germany. There was the Holy Roman Empire, about which it was said it was neither holy, nor non-Roman, and certainly not an empire. So, but the Holy Roman Empire had a Caesar, a Caesar, that was named Rudolf back then. He was a very unique guy. If you want to read about him, it's very, very interesting. He's a very interesting guy. He was very, for our purposes, it would be enough to say he was very tolerant towards Jews, also towards Christians from other dominations. So he was a tolerant guy from the religious point of view. He was also very strange, but he was tolerant. If you want to just read about him. So he asked to meet with the Maharal, and we are being told that the meeting took place, but no one knows what was said during the meeting. Now, this meeting is one of the sources to the legend of the golem. Because one of the reasons being given, why would this Caesar want to meet with the Jewish sage of the Jewish rabbi of the Prague community, one of the reasons being given was because the Maharal created the golem and the Caesar wanted to learn about it. I would just have to warn you that we have no source about this golem business before the 19th century. So make your own cheshbon. What do you think about that? Okay, so that is, all of that was only an introduction to understand the times in which the Maharal operates. Because without understanding the context, it would be very difficult, I think, to understand what is activating this great man. And now, let's begin to speak about the Maharal himself. So what is Maharal? Maharal is Moreinu, our teacher. Harav, Maharal, Rabbi, Mem, Hey, and Resh, it's not his name yet. Lamed is Liba. Now, that is the word that later in Yiddish would become Leib. And it means a lion. So it's Yehuda Aryeh. In German, it would be, I cannot pronounce it, Loew, something like that. Loew, yeah, thank you. So that was the way that the guys called him, right? Loew. Now, when they would give him Aliyah Torah, obviously they would say Yehuda. So his name would be Yehuda ben Chaim. Excuse me, Yehuda ben Bezalel. Yehuda is the brother named Chaim. His father's name was Bezalel. So Yehuda ben Bezalel was his Hebrew name. And as happened to many Jews, they were giving a second name. It would be in the language, in the vernacular of where they were living. And in his case, because his Hebrew name was Yehuda, then what we call today the English name was Aryeh, lion, or Leib, or Loew. Okay, so that was his name. Where was he born? It seems now, that's also, we said many times, all of these people we know perfectly well where and when they deceased. It's very difficult to know when they were born because they were not born with a tag on their head, on their hand saying, I am a gadol. And so no one recorded. But it seems that he was born in Poznan, or Poznan, which is a city that is now in, I hope that I am correct, now in Poland. Back then was in Germany. So that was Poznan. And so he was born there. Now he was born to a very important family. He had 4 brothers. All of them became important rabbis in the time. No one achieved what he achieved, but all of them became very important rabbis. What is interesting is that we have no idea in what yeshiva did he learn and who were his rabbis, because he wrote a lot. There is a whole shelf in this shul dedicated to his books. In none of them, and I'm not saying it because I went through all of them, but because people that are smarter than me and went through all of them say it, that in none of them does he mention a name of his rabbi. Just does not exist, which is very interesting. And if you begin to think again about the historical context in which he works, maybe it has something to do with that, right? With maybe somewhat wanting to rely more on the truth as it is truth than on the authority of my rabbi told me. But we would return to it because it's much more complicated than the way that I just presented it. Anyhow, so we do not know where did he learn. He surely learned somewhere, and he surely had a rabbi, but we are not being given not the name, neither the institution. Some speculate that he did not learn in a formal yeshiva, but learn in what is nowadays called a klois. A klois means it would be a place in which guys would gather for learning, but there would not be a formal rabbi and not a formal learning curriculum. So they would just learn as a bunch of guys learning by themselves. And I don't know if I'm convinced. My assumption is that when you are born to a family of Torah scholars, which is obviously a family that he was being born to, I find it hard to imagine that his father would just send him to the, to the near clothes, just sit and learn with yourself. Hopefully something would go out of you. I do not find it convincing, but what do I know? What do I know? Maybe yes. We have a very interesting tshuva responsa by the Maharal. The Maharal is Rabbi Loew, who was, if you remember, we spoke about when we spoke about the Rema, Rabbi Moshe Isserlish. All of them are contemporary. All of them lived during the 16th century. And the Maharal was a relative of the Rema, of Rabbi Moshe Isserlish. Now, the Maharal is 10 years older than the Maharal. I hope that you follow me. So the Maharal, Rabbi Shlomo Luria, is 10 years older than the Maharal. Some in the field of speculations, some say that the Maharal learned by the Maharal. Now, why to say such a thing? Because there is a tshuva by the Maharal in which he speaks about a certain defamation that went out against an important family with 5 brothers. And he named the 5 brothers. He says they are young lads, but they would one day become great. And this is the family of the Maharal. And one of the guys one of these children, about which now there is a defamation. And what I mean here is that they were claiming that there was maybe a get that was not given right. So there were some rumors about the kashrut of the family. Maybe there is mamzeru there. Maybe, it's, you know how it is. It's easy to speak, and it's going by free. So there was, and we know that was a problem in Poland of the time and in Ashkenaz, that people would motzi shem ra. Defame, yeah, but there is with bad mouth. Families, when they, that would be a type of, how do you kill someone? So that would be just the way that it worked. Nowadays, you say that he's a racist. But back then, you'd say that he's a mamzer. That's just the way things are. And so that's how they, and Maharal is coming out to defend the family of the Maharal. And during this defense, it seems that he knows them very well, and maybe taught him, maybe his grandfather, the grandfather of the Maharal, taught the Maharal. The tshuva, as always, is very dim in the certain aspect that you want to learn from. So we are, if you want, it's in the first source here. I wouldn't even read it inside. I just tell you that that's the tshuva. Fine. So that's what we have from the early days of the Maharal. As you can understand, that is almost nothing. The next piece of information we have about the Maharal is that we know that he got married. Mazel tov. And he got married to, it's very interesting, got married to a certain, to a girl, that her father was, I will give you the name, it would appear later, it's an interesting story, Rabbi Avraham Chayut. You'd understand in a few minutes why I find it important. So he married her, and they had 2 daughters. It seems from the information we have that he married her when he was 32, which is extremely late for this period. I mean, usually people would get married at the age of 13. So 32 is very late. There are stories, now all of them saying now is speculations, complete speculation builds upon legends. But there is a speculation that this Rabbi Avraham Chayut, as was the minhag back then, the father of the wife would give the chatan, let's say 5 years, 10 years of time to sit and learn quietly. So let's say that the Khatan would be usually, as I said, 13, and the father of the Kala would promise that we would sustain them for 10 years, in which they would live in his house and would eat on his table, and the Khatan would be able to learn Torah quietly. And then after he would be in the right age of 23, I guess, then he would go out to the business world. Now, many times it happened that the fathers of the Kalot would promise things that they do not have. That is just, I'm sure that no one did out of a wish to damage his own daughter. But you needed to marry her, so you were trying and you were praying that in the end, Bezat Hashem, it would make out. Many times it did not make out. And it seems that what happened with the Maharal. Now again, I don't want to say that someone promised her something that he didn't have. Maybe he had when he promised and then he lost his money. Who knows? But they couldn't marry because they couldn't finance the couple. And that's why they had to wait. Now, usually what would happen is that if the father of the Kala cannot make good of his promise, then the Shidduch is canceled and the Khatan is allowed to just walk away. Obviously, that was a great shame for the Kala family and the Kala herself, and many times she would be stuck for many years. The Maharal didn't want to cause this shame to his bride and to her family. So he said, I would wait till you will have the money. And he waited to the age of 32. Now, it's a beautiful story. I don't know if it is correct, but it's a beautiful story. It's written in one of his biographies. So, as I said, I'm not an historian. I don't have the ability to validate. I don't know, but it's a beautiful story. Anyhow, they had 2 daughters, and then the wife unfortunately passed away. Also, very common in this time. Women would have, nowadays, women have longer longevity than men. But back then, because of labor, women would have much less. That was life. That was just life. So his wife passed, and he was still in a young age of 40, and now he's stuck with 2 children. So he is being married again, this time to the daughter of a very wealthy man. So no problems this time. And together with the second wife, he had 4 daughters and then a boy. So all in all, he had 6 daughters and 1 boy. We know the names of all of them. The boy, for a reason again that I would speak about later, was called Bezalel, which is after the name of his own father. The Maharal lived very long life. According, again, it's not sure when exactly he was born, but according to what usually we use, he lived to 96. But that means that his son predeceased him, I don't know what, 10 years before he was Niftar, his son was Niftar, and that's a mixed blessing. That's a mixed blessing. Okay. Now, up till now, everything was nice and beautiful, and the Maharal is a nice guy that is waiting for his bride. Everything is beautiful. But the Maharal was an extremely, how would they say it? With a very active temper. And he was very passionate about what we believed in. And that would be a very important part of the story we are going to tell today. So the Maharal, as I said, was born in Poznan. Only at the age of 41, he is being given his first role of Rabbanut. Now, it seems, again, it's speculation, but if it is correct that he was delayed in his marriage because they waited, and then another 10 years, and then his wife was Niftar, so he had to remarry. So it seems that delayed everything. So he became a rabbi only at the age of 41. That is 1553, and he's becoming a rabbi in Nickelsburg. Nickelsburg was back then part of Moravia. that is nowadays the Czech Republic. But there was no Czech Republic back then. So it was a place named Bohemia and Moravia, and that was part of what is Moravia. So that was where he was a rabbi. He was giving psikot, he was teaching Torah, but he was very keen into what we would call today social justice. And again, I cannot say, and have no idea to what extent it was just part of his personality, to what extent it was part of what he learned from Torah and he wanted to have justice, and to what extent it was part of what was going outside. But he has some very interesting pieces. He has a piece in which he writes that in wisdom, I can have wisdom and you can have wisdom, and it does not take from one another. But when we speak about money, he says, it's only a zero, it's always a sum zero game. So there is the only way that I can, that's what he writes at least. So he does not believe in enlarging the cake, right? So he says, if I have more money, it means that you have less. And so he doesn't really like rich people, especially if they keep the money to themselves. And he has no problem speaking about that from the pulpit and writing about it. Now, that is not the best way to win friends and acquire influence. So he is a great, great rabbi, and he's a very strong personality. For reasons that we do not know, after 20 years in Nickelsburg, so he's now 61, he leaves his position. Now, again, I know that I hinted that he had problems there. I do not know that. In the future, he would have. So I let myself at least suggest that that may be part of the deal. But he is leaving Nickelsburg and he's heading to Prague. Prague is the capital, not of the Czech Republic. There is no Czech Republic. Prague is the capital of the Holy Roman Empire because Rudolf decided to move the capital city to Prague. Again, he was a very unique person. If you want to learn about his motivation to that, just you should read about him. But the capital is moving to Prague. And with the capital comes money, comes science, comes culture. Rudolf was very much into financing the new science. And the Maharal decides to move to this now central place of Renaissance revival. So he's moving there. What does he want to do there? It's extremely interesting. He doesn't take upon himself any rabbinical position, not informal. What he wants to do is to establish a Beit Midrash. Now, he does not call it yeshiva on purpose, because he has a big problem with the yeshivot of Poland and of Ashkenaz. What is his problem? He believes that they are too much into pilpul and not enough learning in a way that would be according to a certain logical order. Now, again, is that critique coming only from intern? I mean, just in a vacuum. Maybe he sat down, he saw how people are learning in yeshivot, he was not happy with that, so he decided to establish a new curriculum. But it's hard, I think, to ignore that the outside context, the non-Jewish context, is a context of re-examining the way that we teach, the way that we learn, the way that we think. So the Maharal says, you know, in the Mishnah in Avot, it says that we need at the age of 5 to begin learn Mikra, and at the age of 10 to begin learn Mishnah, and the age of 15 to begin learn Gemara. So why do you begin teach the children Gemara at the age of 7 or 9? They are not ready to that yet. And then you didn't really taught them the foundation. So they do not have the Mikra, they do not have Tanakh, because they didn't really taught them. They would not even have Gemara. Why? Because instead of teaching them the Gemara in the right age, you teach them in a too early age. And then instead of focusing again on fundamentals and building it level after level, you are only going for the pilpul. The pilpul would be, you know, nice votes, nice drashot, and you have a question, and then you have an answer. It's glimmering. It's aesthetical, you may say. It's pleasing, but that is not learning. So in the fourth source here, at the fourth, I skipped the first three. I spoke about them orally, but the fourth one we do need to read, I think. It says, בדורות האלו ובארצות אלו הולכים נתיבות הכלכלות. This is in our lands and in our own times. People walk in non-right ways. חושבים ללכת לפנים, להגיע למקום חפצם, והנה הם שבים אחור. People think that they would arrive to their destination, but they are walking backwards. אזכיר כאן קצת מן הדברים, אף כי אין זה מקומם, כי קצרה רוחי מאכיל בראות לעיניים. He says, that is not really the location here to speak about it, but I cannot stop myself, because I cannot suffer anymore, I cannot stand anymore the kilkul, the spoil, the damage that is happening. ישאלו תורה, אין תשובה בפיו. So you ask a student in a yeshiva, so you ask him, what is written in the Parshat HaShavua? What is the halacha? He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. לא די לנו כי נמשלנו כבהמות נדמו, ולא כמעולה שבבהמות. So he says, if we just be as animals, as behemoth, that would be nice, but they are not even cows, not even pure animals. They are like donkeys. So he is angry about what is going on in the yeshivot. ולא כחמורים, רק נהפך ליבנו. He says, you know what? They are not even donkeys. They are just like stones. Because in the first generation, they said that things have to go by an order. בין 5 למקרא, at the age of 5, begin to learn Bible, Torah. בין 10 למשנה, בין ט"ו, when you're 15, תלמוד, גמרא. והכל כדי לתת לנער מסע, כאשר יוכל לשאת לפי טבעו. So you can load him only according to his abilities. And the way you structure the learning material is that one is relying on the one before. So you can only learn Mishnah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, after he is really knowledgeable in the written Torah, etc., etc., etc. I skip a little. You see 4 lines from the end. אך הטיפשים בארצות אלו. So that is the ideal. But the stupid ones, so you see, that's a very harsh language. Again, you do not win friends, right? And he writing and he publishes. That's not with my documents. That is things that he writes and publish, and people read. And he speaks, he says, the tipshim in these lands, דרכיהם הפך זה. So the way that yeshivot work, the yeshiva system work is, מלמדים עם הנער מקרא מעט מן הפרשה. So you begin by teaching him a little parsha. ומפסיקים. But because you want to teach him in depth, right, be'amkut, so you wouldn't be able to cover the whole parsha in 1 week. No way. So how much can you do? Let's say Rishon and Sheni. Fine. And then you stop. So then next week, that's the next parsha, right? So you have no choice. You need to begin the next parsha. But there is a problem here, because how can you begin the next parsha without you even ever finishing the parsha before? And he says, fine. After the end of the year, Bichlot Shana, Lo Yada Anar, he would know nothing. The boy knows nothing. So he went through the whole year and he knows nothing. Now, I am sorry to say, I think that we are better than this situation, but sometimes not much better. Sometimes the critique that he's leveling here is not completely disassociated with the situation that we are in. And he says, and then the second year you do the same thing, and now the boy is smarter, right? Because he grew up. So you teach him again Rishon and Sheni, but now you don't teach him only Rashi, you also teach him Ramban. Fine, but you never taught him Shlishi and Rabbi and Chamishi and Shishi. And he says, that's for 3 and 4 years. And then, כאשר נעתק מן המקרא, in the last line, when you are finished with Torah, מאומה לא יישא בידו. You go out with nothing. You go out the same way you went in, empty from knowledge. Empty from knowledge.
What language did he write?
In Hebrew.
So nobody understood that.
No, that's against the Rashi Yeshiva. They understood it beautifully. ועוד יש דרכם כסל למוד. They're even more stupid, they say. מלמדו בפירוש רש"י על התורה. You begin to teach him Rashi. Why do you teach him Rashi? Teach him the plain pshat. Don't go to Rashi after he understands the pshat. Now, that is heresy in Ashkenazi Jew. That is heresy in our yeshivot. And he says, and he has an interesting explanation. Why did it happen? He says, because in the villages, they didn't even have the Chumashim. So they taught whatever they had. So they had Rashi, they taught Rashi. So the whole thing is a mistake. And הניגו הדבר לבלות לחלות ימי הנער. The whole thing you do is sit in a school, you sit in a cheder, and you spend this time. That's the only thing happening there. Time being spent. Now imagine yourself as a rabbi, I mean as someone that teaches in yeshiva. How do you feel when that's what the Maharal is writing? ויש שמעתיקים אותו אל הגמרא, and then he continues to Talmud. מיד יצפצף הנער בכל דברים. The only thing he do is just מצפצף. What is מצפצף? He can only, say, utter words. He can utter words, but nothing more than that. בתמונת הפשט לו, but the plain meaning, learning Gemara, it worth nothing. וכאשר יגדל הנער, and when he's being even more grown up, then you begin to teach him Tosfot. But that is stupidity, says בסיכלו דעתו, because he doesn't know Mikra, he doesn't know Mishnah, he doesn't know Talmud, and now he begins to learn Tosfot, which is built upon all of this earlier foundation. Obviously, he will not understand anything. והאנשים האלו הוכו בסנוורים, these people are blinded. And he says the only thing that happens is that, Baruch Hashem, the boy, if he's normal, then when he grows up, he has more seichel, because that's the way God created us, that when you grow up, we understand more. That's the only thing happening. But the rabbi contributes nothing to the education. He says, and I would prove to you, how I prove to you, I will take someone that learned in a yeshiva day school for 10 years, and then I will take someone who didn't learn. And in a month, in the age of 12, I can bring him to the same point in which the guy that sat in yeshiva day school for 10 years is. How that can be? Because you spent 10 years in for vain. Sharp. Now, Baruch Hashem, I don't want Chas v'Chayela to be Motzi Shemra on our yeshiva. We are in a better state than in his time.
But not mine.
You said. Okay, now.
My son told me that when he went to Kofayim in the bush, there were people that joined the school who had never learned Gemara. And he said he was surprised, but he said they learned according to the Chamesh Lemikra. He said the same thing. Within a few weeks, they were already far more advanced.
Far more, and they had all the foundations.
Right, we've done a little bit of Mikra, a little bit of, and he said they were way ahead. They never studied Gemara at all.
That's a beautiful example. And he continues this fire and stones. He says, and then you continue, and it's pilpul shel hevel. The older day they are dealing with building towers in the air, and then he gets married, and that's the end of the thing. That's what he says. And then the guy gets married, and he throws the whole thing away, and then he go to work, and everyone is happy because he learned in yeshiva. So we have a V, right, on a check on learning in yeshiva, and he has a good kala because he was able to say a nice pilpul. And in the end, he gets a new apartment, beautiful apartment from his father-in-law. And he says that, not me. All right, I would read it from inside because I see that you are doubting. He says, I'm in the last paragraph. כאשר רציתי לתקן מה שאפשר. So I tried to fix the system, he says, in Nickelsburg, when I was a rabbi there. הלא גם זה לא עלתה בידי. I couldn't. Why? They resisted. Why the rabbis resisted? באומרם, אם עמלו לרוח, even if it is the whole thing is for vain, from a Torah point of view, הלא היא חוכמתו ובינתו לעיני כל עמי הארץ. But the even more ignorant people, when they see how this young guy can say a pilpul, the whole thing is shtuyot. But the people that are even more ignorant, they think that's great. And the whole point is the show. That's what the Maharal says. So if the show can go on, everyone is happy. ודי לי בזה, כבוד, שם ותהילה. Says, so the people that resisted him told him, that is enough for us. If we have, now they say the three cuffs, right? כסף, כוח וכבוד. So he says, כבוד, שם ותהילה. So if I can have honor, and I am becoming famous, and I have glory, I am happy with that, even Torah-wise. Truly, I know nothing. כי יתנו לי אישה ערנית, סחרנית, בת מי זהב. I don't know how to translate that. But it says I would be given a woman that is ערנית, that is knowledgeable, סחרנית. By the way, that's very interesting. So who do you want to marry if you're an Ashkenazi good Jew in a good standing, you learn in a yeshiva, you can get the best girl that you want. So how would you take? Answer, she needs to be ערנית, so someone that is active. סחרנית, you know, understand what is סחרנית, right? So she's a good businesswoman. But מי זהב. מי זהב, that's a biblical name, but what it means here, she's the daughter of money. So that's what people want to achieve. על זאת תאווה לארץ, so that's what we all should more on, ופסו אנשי אמונה, and there are no people of faith anymore. People are only interested in good shidduch, people are only interested in having glorious names, and that's the end of the story. So he is, after 20 years, he's tired of trying to fix the system in Nikeshburg. So he decides, I would go to Prague as a private citizen, not as the rabbi, as a private citizen, and I would open a new learning house. I would not call it yeshiva, because I'm not even interested to be associated with the old system. And that would be a Beit Midrash. I wouldn't call it a yeshiva, I would call it a Beit Midrash. I was in a certain place in which also they had a koilel. They didn't want to name it a koilel because the koilel in our time also have certain connotations. So they call it a Beit Midrash. It was a koilel. Married people were sitting, learning, and given milga stipend. But they call it a Beit Midrash, so, okay, anyhow, you understand. So anyhow, the Maharal comes to Prague, and he is 61. He's 61. And he opens a Beit Midrash for boys. As a private citizen, I don't know how he funded it. I didn't find any source about that, so I'm not sure what, did he have himself enough money? Maybe, as I said, his second wife came from a very wealthy family, so maybe she was bankrolling the whole thing. I don't know. Anyhow, the Maharal is opening this yeshiva, and for 10 years, things are going pretty well. There are 100, 200 Talmidim in the yeshiva, so fine. After 10 years, so he's 71 now, the Rav of Prague passes away. And, you know, the Jews of Prague says, instead of, you know, establishing a committee and beginning to search, we have the Maharal here. Let's make him the Rav of Prague. Oh boy, if they knew. So they ask him to give a drasha in Shabbat in the Altnoi Shul. In five people were in Prague, the Altnoi Shul, and to give a drasha, and after, obviously the drasha would be excellent because the Maharal, and then we'd have the formal appointment, everything would be fine. He stands up to the pulpit in the Shabbat, and he blessed them. He says, all the rich Jews here do not contribute enough for Talmud Torah. They do not learn enough. You are not observant enough. People here are drinking yain akum, so they are not stringent enough in wine that was touched by non-Jews. So he is standing there in his proba. Yeah, I can only imagine. Right? But he was 71. I guess that he didn't need to give account to anyone. And he was giving them Musar. Guess what? He was not chosen as the Rabbi of Prague in 1538. Who was chosen instead? Very interesting. Rabbi Avraham Chayut. His father-in-law. Yeah. So he was, it seems, a standard. So I don't know how old, I understand the question. How old was Rabbi Avraham Chayut? I don't know. I would guess 80 something. But we know from our time as well that, you know, sometimes great Rabbanim can be of an old age. And he was in favor of Pilpul. So
could have been younger.
Yeah, he could be. You know what? You're right. He could have been younger. You're right. maybe he was 67, yeah, maybe he was 70 also. Anyhow, so he's being appointed. So his first father-in-law, I don't know how the relationship between them. His first father-in-law is being appointed as the Rav of Prague. And here the Maharal decides to leave Prague and to return to Poznan, where he was born. So he's returning to there, and there he's being appointed as a Rav for 4 years. After 4 years, the father-in-law is resigning from Prague because there was a machloket there, a dispute in the Kehila between the rich and the poor about tax. I mean, that's how it is. And it seems that he lost his favor in the eyes of the people, and he's expelled. And now the Maharal of Prague is back to Prague. So he's back there for 4 years. And they ask him, again, give a drasha in the big shul, and then he would appoint you. And what do you know? He's again giving the same drasha he gave 4 years ago. So he's not going to change. He's not appointed. But here's the yeshiva. It seems that he didn't look for kavod. It was not his thing. He was looking to establish what he believed would help the Jewish people to the future. Now, during all of that, he is also writing his books, his sefarim. Now, we do not have time to go in depth into the sefarim, unfortunately, but what he's trying to do there is to reread Chazal. Why does he need to reread? Not halacha. He was a master of halacha, but that's not where his fame came from. Agada. Why does he need to reread Agada? Because he has this insight that we were reading Agada wrong all along in the last 400 years. Because we were reading the Agada and thinking, that what is described is the plain meaning. But now, as science is advancing, and we begin to rethink, and we do not only rely on authority, we understand, for example, a question that he was dealing with. So Chazal say that Yerushalayim is in the center of the world, right? Now, as long as you have the old world picture, it can be thought so, right? Because you have Asia, and you have Europe, and you have Africa, and Eretz Israel is somewhat, I can understand how it can be seen in the middle, and Yerushalayim can be seen as the middle of Eretz Israel. So fine. So Yerushalayim is the middle, is the center of the world. But then they discover the Americas, right? That is already 1491. That's before he was born. So is Yerushalayim still the center of the world? Now that seems to us as a stupid question, silly question. That's because we live much longer after the Maharal, and we all internalized his revolution, because what he said was, Chachamim were not coming to teach us geography. They came to teach us about, when they speak about centrality, they speak about an idea, a concept, not a geographical, physical reality. After understanding that, and in many Agadatot, that's only one example, he began to apply that also to Agadatot that not necessarily are wrong in the historical or the geographical or scientific sense. But he said, everything Chazal speak about, they are conveying concepts. So we need to read them in a conceptual way. Again, not allegory. Conceptual. I hope that I can, saying that something is an allegory, to say, they speak about Yerushalayim, but it's not really Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is, I don't know, Yerushalayim is God, and center means above, and world means, I don't know, the cosmos. So saying that Yerushalayim is in the center, he say, that is allegory. That's not how we work. So he says, no, we speak about Yerushalayim. We really speak about Yerushalayim. But when we say we need to understand what is the concept behind being in the center. That is the way that he works. And you know what? It is convincing. Much more than almost everything else that was written before him. That's why we still use the Sefarim, because they really are convincing the way that he reads Chazal. And he is revolutionizing the way we read Chazal. Again, he doesn't mention any rabbis. He is going back to the sources. But now it's important. Why? As I said, in the non-Jewish world, as the Renaissance is advancing, people understand that they need to think by themselves, right? What is enlightenment? the courage to think for yourself and not rely on any early authority. You can respect early authority, but you do not rely on them. It's not how the Jewish tradition works. We do not say think for yourself. What we say is interpretate for yourself. For yourself, as to the rank you are in. But what we do is always build on the past. So we do not say, if I'm a scientist, a science of the new science, I can stand up and say, no, Aristotle was wrong. Period. He was a great man. I can respect him, but he was wrong. And that's it. That's not how Torah works. You can reinterpret it. You can re-explain. You can have new insights into what was said, but you can never stand up and say, Chachamim were wrong. It's out of the laws of the game. Not because I think that Chachamim were infallible. I think that every human being is fallible. As a matter of fact, there is a whole tractate in the Talmud called Masechet Horayot, which speaks about what happens if a sage is wrong in his instruction. So it's not about infallibility. It's about how do we build our tradition. We do not build our tradition believing that there was a dark age and now we are coming into light. We build our tradition as growing from one generation to the other. And the Maharal was not the only one that thought in this, among these lines. And I don't think that without him, we would not have reached this type of tradition. But obviously, he is one that epitomizes this type of thought. And in large extent, what we are doing today is continuing this line that he, I wouldn't say began, but that he emphasized, developed, and established. And in that, he is one of the greatest figures of Jewish thought. And that's why 500 years later, we are still learning is Machshava Sefarim. So that is very important. As I said, in 1592, he was interviewed by Caesar Rudolph. If you want to think it was because of the golem, then go ahead. And he's still very active. He's still very active. He's back to Poznan. And again, he's a rabbi there for 5 years this time. And in 1597, he's 85. He's packaging himself again and coming back to Prague. Now, we do not know why he traveled so much, but he seems as a person that spoke what is in his mind. People speaking what is on their mind usually are not very liked. That's just the way things are. And he becoming the head of the, in 85, they decided they would have him as the head rabbi. He survived the job for 2 years and then he retired. So at the age of 87, he retires from being the head rabbi of Prague. And he lives for another 10 years, as I said, to the age of 97. And in 1609 is Niftar. And as I said, while he was a giant of Torah and of Halakha, we have some of his halachic rulings. He has his real name built from these two areas we spoke about. One is Chinuch and the revolution. We didn't accept everything that he said and wrote, but you cannot say anything about Jewish education in a deep sense without relating to the writings of the Maharal in the area and his revolution in how machshava, in how Jewish thought should be learned. And these two areas he had left, we can say an internal remark, and that's a personality that everyone, I think, should learn from. And if you can, I think some of his writings were also translated. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult read. He's repeating himself once and twice and 3 times. He wants really to impress you with his insight, but sometimes it's become somewhat long, as this shiur. So we'll end this shiur here, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we would continue next week. Right, next week, we would continue to the next line in the Ashkenazic in the history of the Torah scholars of Ashkenazi Jews. Thank you very much for joining, and great month. And Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach.
So the golem story is pure myth?